Thank you all for being here. We really appreciate your coming out. We plan to make this event really worthwhile for you, get you some good information this evening. Not going to introduce the entire team because there's a whole bunch of them, but you'll get to hear from several. There's a number of city staff scattered around the room, have a number of department directors here, police chief, interim fire chief. We do have City Councilman Neil Ferguson in the back. We'll have him come up in a minute to say hello as well. Our city manager is over here on the side, Deputy City Manager Eric Stanley with Bright Industries. I always want to say Bright Realty, but it's Bright Industries. Same difference. Gotcha. So we were here, and also we want to thank Louisville ISD trustee Kronda Timish, one of your neighbors, and we'll bring her up in a little bit also. Oh, you know what? I said hello to you, and it just didn't click the name. So we have a second trustee, Catherine Sell. So thank you very much. We appreciate your being here also. They're here partly because we've gotten some questions during some of the board meetings that relate to LISD. We're not the experts on that, so we brought in some experts that can answer questions. So, before we get into tonight's agenda, there were 3 parking lot questions from our September meeting that I want to touch on very briefly. For those who aren't familiar with the concept, parking lot question means we are asked a question, we didn't have an answer, we wrote it down, and we're coming back to you now. One of those was about the progress of the Windhaven project, especially crossing the railroad. That has been a long project. We think we're moving very close to some resolution on that. So we plan for that to be a topic of a detailed presentation at our March meeting. That is the 4th Thursday in March. We'll have a lot of information for you there on Windhaven. We think we're pretty close to having some good answers there. And a second parking lot question was about parks and playgrounds, especially about the Dragon Playground. And I understand 1B is in the process of getting ready to do some work there. We also expect, unless something changes, to have enough answers by the March meeting to have a parks presentation for you as well. So we're working on that. We're getting close, still some things we're trying to figure out. The third parking lot question we got was about golf carts. One of our attendees at the previous meeting said she had heard from some friends or customers that there were a couple of cities in North Texas that simply did not enforce the state law regarding driver's license for a golf cart on a public street. Police Chief Deaver, when he comes up for his police update, there he is. He's sneaky for all that gear. He will respond to that also with what he has found out in talking with those cities we were referred to. So we will address one of those 3 this time. 2 of them we expect, definitely one in March and hopefully both. So having said that, one thing we want to do tonight is we're talking to residents, not board members per se, but residents who aren't as involved. We're finding that there are some people who've lived here since '97. They are very familiar with the Castle Hill structure and history and vision, but there also are some who've moved here just in the past few years that aren't as familiar with it. So we had invited Chris Bright to come and talk about it, and he agreed to help with that. Unfortunately, he's not able to be here tonight, but he graciously allowed us to visit his office on Monday, and we interviewed him with some of those key questions we've been hearing. So we have a video here with Chris Bright answering those questions for us, for you, so we're going to play that. When I start it, let me know if you can hear it in the back. I don't know if we have volume control, but we tested earlier, and we think you'll be able to hear it. So.
Describe the original vision for Castle Hills and what convinced you that it was a good and workable vision.
Well, I think a lot of times people are not aware of that when you're starting these things, you're really just dealing with a piece of real estate. And so, I mean, realistically, we started the planning on Castle Hills in 1982. So I was roughly 26, 27 years old. And the first thing that we really worked on was the road patterns. And once the road patterns were in place, then we could start to figure out what we wanted the development to look like. So we really started pretty much full-time on the planning on it in the early 90s. And since I grew up in the Park Cities, I kind of used it as a planning model. But when we talk about what we were trying to do vision-wise, we were really trying to just create a special place to live. Okay, and what were the elements that went into making it a special place to live? And so when we focused on those things, I grew up in an area that was primarily residential. I also know that in the real world, commercial is what drives the tax base of cities. Okay, and if there's not a significant commercial tax base, it's very difficult for the single family housing basically to pay for itself. And so we decided to begin with the single family, but we saved most of the frontage that we had against the freeways for the future commercial development. And so that's kind of the way we focused in it. And I do think it's important to understand that a developer's role in the creation of something like this is mainly to make sure he doesn't create impediments that allow the community to not be what it wants to be. And so what we tried to do at Castle Hills was focus on those things that we thought would make a special residential community and put those into our planning elements. I had a land planner, a guy named John Krasinski from Mill Valley, California, who worked with me in the early stages of it. And he asked me what I wanted him to do. And I said, well, I want you to represent the homeowners, okay? I have no problem with figuring out ways to gather density to put more stuff in, but I need somebody in this planning process who is thinking about it from the perspective of those people who are going to live here. And so that was really John's role in the early aspects of what we were doing. And we tried to focus on, in the single family in particular, what the negatives of what I've seen in a lot of suburban communities. And what I call a lot of suburban communities are backdoor neighborhoods, where they basically, you know your rear neighbor better than you know your front neighbor. And so, because that's where you enter the house, is through the garage. And so in the early stages of Castle Hills, the first lots, basically we were alley served, but the builders were required to build entries into the garage from the front of the house. And the idea was to push people into the front of their houses instead of into the rear of their houses. And so that was kind of the thought process. And then we started talking about what are the different elements that make people want to come outside. Well, parks was a big part of it, okay? And we kind of said in the early days that we wanted to have a park within walking distance of every home. And since I'm from Texas, I defined walking distance as 3 blocks or less, because I don't know many people that'll walk farther than that in July. I mean, so that's kind of the approach that we took. And we looked at a lot of different aspects of it. One of the first things that we decided to do was widen the front parkways to 6.5 feet from the standard 5, and to widen the sidewalks from the typical 4 feet to 5 feet, because it's very difficult to walk side by side down a 4-foot wide sidewalk. I mean, so we wanted a couple to be able to walk down the sidewalk side by side, not necessarily kind of going single file. We also looked at what we see in neighborhoods, which is one of the things we noticed was that houses kind of create almost like a wall as you go down the street. So we wanted to figure out a way to vary the front yard setbacks so that when you drove down a street, it didn't look like you were driving down a tunnel. It had some variation in the way the homes looked. And so we ended up, in working with the city of Louisville, we ended up basically coming up with abilities for a house to sit closer to the street if it built what we called a qualifying front porch. So a front porch big enough to sit on, okay? I mean, but to put furniture on. And that allowed that house to sit a little closer to the street, and it helped us to basically change the streetscape piece. We also, and this was one of the early disagreements we had with Louisville, we hadn't had a whole lot, pretty much. I don't know that I've had but one vote in the history of our relationship with Louisville that has not been unanimous at the city council. And I don't know that I have ever gone to the city council without 100% endorsement of the staff. So that makes it easier to get a positive vote from the council. But this was one that we didn't have an agreement on, and that was the width of the streets. And the normal street in Louisville is 31 feet back of curb to back of curb. When I look at the literature on this stuff, the American Society of Civil Engineers recommends a 26 to 28 foot wide street for a residential street, narrower. And so that's when I came up with the idea of what we have with the rollover curbs in Castle Hills. And those are a 26.25 inch profile rather than a 6-inch profile. So what they do from a practical standpoint is they create a perception that the street is narrower than it is. And the point for me doing that was I wanted to slow the traffic down. okay? The more conflicts there are in the street, the less likely it is for people to drive fast. So that's why we did those, and the 25-mile-an-hour speed limits that we put into Castle Hills. All was an attempt, since it was primarily a residential neighborhood at that point, as an attempt to slow down the traffic. And I think it's been relatively successful. I mean, I never really believed that people would drive 25, but I was hoping by putting it in at 25 that I could hold them to 30 to 32. And that's what I think has happened to a large extent. And so all of these little elements went in detail, and the thought process went into the thought process behind Castle Hills. And what I was able to do with Louisville was meet with a small select group of their staff, which they brought in and out. And I got a commitment from, most of these guys aren't there anymore, but Jimmy Leach was the director of planning at that point in time. And what I asked Jimmy to do with Louisville's rules was, okay, I said, so let's talk about what the intent of your rules are, okay? So if, for instance, Louisville's rules require streets to intersect at 90-degree angles, okay? It's not really that pretty when it does that. And so I said, what the point of that is to make it so that people that stop at a street can see cars coming, okay? So if I put a view easement across the front of these lots where the streets are not intersecting at 90 degrees, I'll make it where cars can still see each other, and yet I don't have to use that 90-degree angle. And Jimmy agreed with that. So we were able, with that level of detail, to go through the planning process. We created, frankly, our own zoning categories, which are available to anybody in Louisville. Okay, but at the point in time that we were negotiating with Louisville, these zoning categories weren't there. And so basically, you know, when we were having the discussions, they said, well, we have this zoning category. And I said, well, if I agree to a minimum house size of X square feet, can I write a new zoning category? and that's what we ended up doing. And most of Castle Hills fits within one of those new zoning categories. And a lot of times our homeowners association is more restrictive than the actual zoning ordinance itself, which is what allowed us to create the variation in the street ordinance, in the street setbacks and the sidewalks and stuff like that. So that really, those were the things that were driving us in the early days of Castle Hills.
How did you extend the connected front yard idea to include mail service?
And I talked with the Postal Service at the point in time we were beginning Castle Hills, and they said they would not do a door-to-door delivery. As a matter of fact, they said, we won't even, I don't like the mailbox monuments is what I call them. They said they wouldn't even do those, and I said, well, I don't want them anyway. And they said they were going to do gang boxes, which didn't seem like what I wanted to do. So we ended up creating this concept of what we do as a mail center in the middle of the community in different places. And the Postal Service delivers to those areas, and then the Homeowners Association opens up the mailboxes with permission from the residents and hand delivers it to the front door of the residents, which to me made it feel more like the neighborhoods we grew up in rather than what you're seeing in the new areas.
How have you been able to stay true to the Castle Hills vision over the years?
Well, I mean, I think the reason that you can stay true to it to a large extent is because you're not really focused on the specifics as it is on what you're trying to create. And when we began development planning out here, as I say, Amazon was a startup, not the third largest retailer in the nation. Smartphones didn't exist. I mean, in the earlier years of Castle Hills, probably 90% of our marketing was print. Today, it's about 10%. And so what we've tried to do is evolve with the world as it pertains to it, but by remaining true to what we were trying to do, which was create neighborhoods. And to some extent, the role of the developer, as I said earlier, is to make sure he didn't create impediments. And we had things that we wanted to do from a planning standpoint. For instance, we didn't want to do any internal walling within Castle Hills. Okay, so the only areas of Castle Hills that are walled off are the gated areas, the private streets. The rest of our product separations are all done with streets. And again, my view was that there really wasn't anything significantly different between a person living in a $200,000 house and a $700,000 house. They probably had similar educational backgrounds, similar mores. It was just simply a question of one of them made more money than the other, and I didn't want to separate our residents by income strata. And so the concept of Castle Hills, of which you don't see many internal walls in Castle Hills, was to separate the product with streets rather than with walls. And we don't really we market names for areas when we're doing them, but they're pretty simple in nature. Our marketing department doesn't always like that, but we tend to call them by geographics, like Castle Hills North, Castle Hills South, Castle Hills Southwest, Castle Hills Southeast. And we don't put those names in the neighborhood, okay? So once we've stopped selling, they're really not the name of the neighborhood anymore, because what I wanted people to perceive is that they lived in Castle Hills, not that they lived in some particular section of Castle Hills.
Why did you partner with Louisville?
Almost all, no, I'd say all communities have to start with, to put it somewhat bluntly, is how are you going to flush the toilet, okay? And we basically only really had three options. One, to stay in Hebron and build our own sanitary sewer system, to go to Carrollton, or to go to Louisville. If we tried to go to the Colony or Plano or something like that, we were going to have to lift the sewer, which was going to be very expensive. And so we basically, once we elected to go the route of seeking annexation by either Carrollton or Louisville, I met with both of them. And I said, here's what I wanted to accomplish. And I ended up having a very strong working relationship with Chuck Owens, who was the city manager at that point in time. Basically, we figured out a way to put the deal together, and I told Chuck I really didn't want to negotiate with a 30-member staff. I only wanted 3 or 4 people in the room at the same time, and so City of Louisville agreed to that, and we made great progress doing that. Carrollton, in contrast, basically said they didn't have time to meet for about 60, 75 days. And then when I showed up for the first meeting in Carrollton, there were 30 people in the room. And so this isn't what I agreed to do. So we by that time, we'd made huge progress with the city of Louisville. And I think I had this initial meeting with them all in November of 95. And by March, we had a deal with Louisville that I thought made sense. And so we basically ceased negotiations with Carrollton. The agreement with Louisville was passed in the council meeting on April 1st of 1996. And then Carrollton got involved, and Carrollton came in and offered the same deal that Louisville had offered, and pretty much in writing, signed by every member of their council. And I met with them and my dad, with the mayor of Carrollton. I said, you've got to understand, this was prior to April 1st, but we've made a deal. We shook hands. We have an agreement. We're not going to change. So, to us, what we've said we're going to do is important. And so we stuck with the deal with Louisville. We moved forward with Louisville, and I think it's been a good working relationship. You sign these agreements, and we signed this agreement in April of 96. And the working relationship means that we very seldom actually pull that agreement back out. And it's been adapted and adjusted, and we don't do things exactly in accordance with that agreement because we have a working relationship. And one of those things that from our standpoint is important to that is, and trust me, I don't always agree with Louisville staff, okay? But we don't ever try to go around staff to council. Okay, we're going to battle it out with staff to find something that they and we can both agree with, and then we're going to go to council with staff's recommendation. And that's been our approach with Louisville since the beginning. And I think that's the reason why we have a strong working relationship. We're now on, there is only one council member that was on the council and when we signed this agreement. That was Rudy. Okay, Rudy was on the council at that point, the current mayor, Rudy Durham. The entire council has turned over. I'm on my third city manager. Okay, but all of the city managers have been promoted from within Louisville. So even though I might not have worked with them initially, they were familiar with the history of the agreement. Okay, so you know, Chuck retired very shortly after we signed the agreement, and I say, you know, I can't remember today whether it was a year or two, but not much longer than that. So I worked with Claude King for, I don't know, 15 years. And Donna was one of his assistant city managers. So when Donna transitioned into it, she transitioned into it with an understanding of the history of the relationship and the history of what we accomplished. We do think it's important, and have always tried to stay true to what we told Louisville we would do at the beginning. And I think if you ask the staff, the people who were there at that point in time, we've delivered pretty much everything that we said we were going to do. I mean, when Castle Hills began, the land in Castle Hills was on the tax rolls for about $25–30 million. Okay, current tax roll in Castle Hills is about 2.8 billion. That's not million, billions. I mean, so we've built 4,500 homes. We've built shopping centers. We've built some office, and we're transitioning into basically the portion of Castle Hills that is the commercial aspect of it. And I describe it as the residential part of Castle Hills is the area where the residents of Castle Hills live. Our commercial's kind of like the front parlor and the living room, okay? It's how we invite visitors into the community without making them necessarily integral to what we're doing in the community. And so the commercial sites are our daytime population, people that visit the community, but the crown jewel of Castle Hills is and always has been the single family. Sanitary sewer was what drove the choice of negotiating partners in this deal. So we had purchased our own water by then. We had actually made a deal with the Upper Trinity Regional Water District in 1994. So we had water that we could deliver independent of the sanitary sewer, but you still needed the sanitary sewer. And I really didn't want to build a plant within Castle Hills. I mean, so the options really were to figure out a way to work with the city. And I tried to cut a deal with Chuck that said, you know, I would agree if he'd provide me sanitary sewer, that I would agree not to seek annexation by any other city. And he said, that's just giving you exactly what you want, Chris. It's like, he said, that's like the Brer Rabbit telling him not to throw him into the briar patch. I mean, you're trying to get me to give you exactly what you want, which is give you sewer, and you can stay outside of the city of Louisville. We're not even going to begin with discussions on that basis. And he was right. It was an accurate appraisal of what I wanted. So we ended up making that decision to move forward, understanding that we would be in Louisville. That was the ultimate plan. But it might take 20 or 30 years.
What are the most significant advantages Castle Hills has to offer?
Well, I think it's the lifestyle. I mean, you know, certainly there are, you know, we had the benefit of my dad having bought this property a long time ago. So when we began development, there was already a lot of development north of us. I mean, this was almost an infill site. I mean, it's kind of hard to call 2,500 acres an infill site, but to some extent it was. The colony had 30,000 people. North of us, I think Frisco was already at a population of about 35,000. And we're significantly south of either one of them. I mean, one of the early things we used to put on the billboards in Castle Hills was that if you lived in Castle Hills, you'd be home now. So, you know, we had that advantage. We had the advantage that a lot of master planned startup communities don't have, which is the guy, Ted, from one of the marketing, or one of the survey companies that we use, said that Castle Hills could always pass the Bluebell test. I asked him, what do you mean? He said, well, you know, a lot of these new communities, by the time you get home from the grocery store, your Bluebell's melted. He said in Castle Hills, the grocery stores are already there. They're at the perimeter of the property. So the services to our residents were available in the areas of Carrollton immediately to the south of us. And so when you came into this community, you got the benefits of the new construction, you got the benefits of the new planning aspects, but you still had immediate access to the things you needed to live.
What is left to complete the Castle Hills vision?
Pretty much all of the commercial, though, as I say, the front door of the community. You know, we probably still have 350 acres left to develop. I mean, but we're at the last of the single family. I mean, we've got about 600 lots left, which will put us to about 5,000 single family homes. We'll end up with a population of somewhere probably 25 to 30,000 people at the end of the day. We will end up with, in our opinion, about $4 billion worth of ad valorem tax base in today's dollars. And we'll do that in about 2,500 acres, maybe 3,000 acres. And to put that in contrast, I mean, Louisville is about 22,000 acres, okay, outside of Castle Hills. And they're about 10 or $11 billion in tax base. So the benefit to Louisville and what we're trying to do with the commercial, which is the next aspect of what we're doing, is we're going to provide that same or similar amount of tax base, basically at about twice the density level of what Louisville is. And that's what makes us attracted to the city, and that's where the focus is now. And the focus is today creating, we have, like I say, 25 to 30,000 people that will be in our nighttime population. We're trying to create 18 to 22,000 people that will be in the daytime population, which makes our retailers more successful, allows us to provide a higher level of services to our residents, because those services will be close. But those services to survive need density, okay? They need people. And the more utilization I can provide a retailer of the number of hours his store is open, the more successful that retailer is and the better quality retailers I get.
What more can you tell us about Crown Center?
Well, we're still working through with Louisville on some of those aspects. Again, that's one of the things that we think that I said has evolved. I mean, when I looked at the early planning at Castle Hills, I mean, one of the things I looked at was what's wrong with development in the United States. And if you look outside of this country, most of the places outside of the United States have not separated their uses. The office, the retail, the commercial, all meld in with each other. It's only in the United States that we have separated those uses historically. And frankly, I think it's a failed model. I don't think that model works anymore. So the idea from the beginning at Castle Hills was to find a way to sensitively mix those uses together in a way that they complemented each other rather than created problems for each other. And that's what the approach that we've tried to take from the beginning is at Castle Hills. It is an evolving thing with the city, and what's difficult for a developer to do is to understand that the city is routinely thinking 40 to 50 years in front. When I talk about Castle Hills, I'm not talking about just today. I'm talking about what is Castle Hills going to look like 40 years from now, okay? What happens when there are driverless cars? What looks different? How do things change? Well, cities are used to operating on those kind of planning horizons. I don't think many developers are, but because our plan for Castle Hills is to remain involved in Castle Hills through the ownership of a lot of the commercial properties in the long term, we approach it differently than a lot of developers do. You know, I generate probably out of single-family home sales, lot sales, rents, and stuff like that, $80 to $90 million a year in revenues out of Castle Hills. The home building revenue will go away, and it'll be supplanted over a period of time with rental revenues. But we're not going away. I mean, I live in the community. My brother lives in the community. 2 of his 4 kids live in the community. They're raising their children in the community. Well, we are a part of the community, and we are focused not only on the present of Castle Hills, but the future. And the relationship with Louisville is, to us, a big part of that overall view and approach of today and the future of Castle Hills. So I think that when people are talking about what we're trying to do at Castle Hills, what we're trying to do is create a place where you want to live, okay? And that means that not everybody's the same, so I have to create a bunch of different aspects of that. Some portions of our amenities will be used by some people, some will be used by others. Some people just like to stay in their house, okay? All of those things are just fine, okay? But it is important for us to recognize that this community would not be what it is without its residents, okay? It's not the developer. It's the people who live here that drive and make what Castle Hills what it is today.
So we don't normally play videos that are that long, but when we talk about the history of Castle Hills, we think it's so important that you hear from Chris Bright, because it was always his vision. He created Castle Hills, the beautiful community that you are, and we're very proud that we've been a partner in that. So we wanted Chris to be able to share that vision, and as we've moved towards annexation, we get more and more questions from people about why Louisville? You know, why didn't we go to Carrollton? Why not Plano? And I think Chris, more than anyone, can tell you a lot of the steps that he took, why we were selected, because we're the best, but you know, why those things occurred. And so we wanted to play the video. It was kind of long. We're going to put it on our website so you can encourage your neighbors and your friends to take a look at that too, because I think it has just a lot of good information. But with everything he said, we also wanted to be here to answer questions. So as Chris said, I've been with the city a long time. I started back in 1990 and promoted in 96 to assistant city manager about the same time that we were signing that agreement that he described. So I've been involved in the beginning. Our deputy city manager, Eric Ferris, he's been with the city longer than me. He's as old as dirt, but we both have perspectives that date way back. And so when we think about annexation, it's just something we always knew would eventually happen, and that's how we tend to talk about it. And I know we have people say, how do you know for sure? And there are steps that we have to work through. We'll be meeting with our city council in February to talk about more of those steps. Councilman Ferguson is here, and he's been very involved in the last few years, but there's some details to still work through. But it's important to us that we understand the questions you have, the clarifications that you need, the concerns you have, so hopefully we can share information with you and get you more comfortable. I will tell you that we always have seen Castle Hills as a jewel. When you talk about Las Colinas as part of Irving, how many people ever say, I'm going to Irving when they're talking about Las Colinas? They don't. They call it Las Colinas. You guys will always be Castle Hills, and you will always be a jewel. We've always seen you as part of our community, And we'll work hard to keep you at the same level that you are now. There will be no changes in that. So with that, Eric Stanley is also here. He's part of Chris Bright's team. And so he can probably answer maybe some questions we can if it's about the Master Association or the HOAs or anything like that. But I'd just like to open it up to the audience and see what questions you might have. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I have one. Obviously, when we get annexed, we'll be paying the city of Louisville taxes. Will there be any change in the tax rate for the Denton French County Water District? Or is that all staying in place and we're just adding another layer?
So at annexation, the water districts are dissolved. They go away. Yeah, so if you remember, each one of you, there's different districts from 1B through 1H. Those were set up with public improvement districts layered on top. Debt was issued, your tax rate pays down that debt. But at annexation, we assume all of that debt. So really the role of the districts are no longer necessary. They're dissolved and they go away. And so you take on the city of Louisville tax rate, which I'll stop and brag about for a few moments. We have one of the lowest property tax rates in the Metroplex. We compare ourselves to 17 different cities. Only one, Grapevine, is lower than us, and that's just because they have a gazillion hotels that help them pay their cost of service. So, but yes, that would go away. Any other questions?
Question.
Yes, ma'am.
When that happens, I guess is the next year, as a homeowner, will I have to worry about notifying like the county or whoever does the tax bills about that? I mean, is that all automated?
That's all automated. You'll become part of our city at annexation, so your water bills will start coming from Louisville. The appraisal district's going to know now you're part of us, so it'll all be really taken care of for you. Yes, sir?
Yeah.
Hi.
On the question before, the districts go away, but I think the question was, you still have to pay for water, and there is going to be still water
Oh,
charges.
yes,
on
certainly, just like
those
any
rates.
other, just like any other resident, you would pay for water. Yeah, and we're looking at certainly the water rate structure. You have something called inclining block rates, and that's a discussion we'll have with council. We have a flat rate water system in Louisville, so the likelihood is that we will probably be moving our residents to your structure, but that's what we're studying right now, and we'll be talking with council in February. Sorry, thank you for clarifying that. Yes, sir. Hi.
Just with regard to property tax appraisal, who will handle that after annexation?
So Denton County Appraisal District would handle all of the appraisals just like they do now. Not
Okay.
anything changes.
Just one point there, I live in a water district where the water rate, or the taxes were brought down, and they were brought down in 1 year, approximately 25%. The next year, my house was appraised about 25% greater. So I'm just curious if there's any anticipation that as we drop in property tax, will Denton County come in and look at our homes and try to make up for that by just appraising the unit?
Certainly the appraisal district has to follow very specific rules on how they appraise homes, and so an annexation should not affect an appraisal value at all. Any other questions?
Depending on the time of year that the taxes or the annexation happens, will they prorate our taxes?
So you would be, again, there's a lot of unknowns as to when we would annex. I mean, we've talked about July of 2021. And so your taxes would already be paid, right, by that time. And then, so you'd be going into, in January, you'd be paying Louisville rates.
Right, paying the next
Would
year.
it be for the whole year, the Louisville rate, not half water district?
Put that on the parking. I'm gonna answer, I'm gonna have to think about that question
I
a
asked
little
that
bit.
last meeting, and they said for the calendar year 2021, it would be the Louisville rate.
Yeah, and that makes sense. Yeah, Brenda, have you researched
Right.
that? Yeah.
That's correct, you pay, the taxes you pay 1 year is based on the value at January 1st of the prior year. So they'll use that value, but it'll be a different rate if you are annexed during that year to the city.
Yeah, so 20, they would be paying their water district rates. 21, they're gonna be paying Louisville.
Right.
Is it for sure
Or
21 then?
2022, those bills
21,
are due
22.
January 2022,
Right.
January 31st.
Yeah.
So that's the new, if
So-
we annex in the summer of 2021.
So certainly, from a financial perspective, we can annex in '21, and those are the issues that we're looking at right now, and how we would go about doing it.
How definite would you say 21 is? Like 90%?
It's a difficult question to answer. I would like to say I'm pretty confident that it'll happen, but I've got a boss, there's one of them sitting back there. The city council will make some of those decisions, but they're very supportive of annexation and anxious to move forward.
So aside from those considerations with council and so forth, is there a vote here in Castle Hills to decide?
That's another question that the council will need to answer. There are a couple of different options. We can annex under what's called a strategic partnership agreement. Each one of your water boards would be approving that change, and that is a methodology for annexation. The other methodology is a vote, is an election. And that decision's still out there on how that would be done.
Go ahead.
How would either of those affect the agreement that's been in place for 2 decades that y'all
The
talked about?
1996 agreement?
Right.
So the 96 agreement really dealt with the development of Castle Hills. Yeah, once you're annexed, right? So
Right,
you would
but
fall
made
under
it
all
sound
city
like the
rules.
vote-
The-
You made it sound like there could be a vote that may not allow it, or?
So the 96 agreement doesn't really talk about the SPA agreement, which really didn't even exist in 96, or an election. It just says that we would not annex until certain things occurred, okay? So that was really what was set up in the 96 agreement. So now, under state law, that's what starts guiding how we annex, and there's 2 methodologies to do that under state law.
So your question to make sure was, with either one, if the vote fails at the board or fails at the public, how does that affect the agreement, the development agreement?
Or just would it impact whether or not we get annexed, I guess, is really the question.
So I think I answered his question. Yeah. Yeah, did you feel like? Yeah. Yeah, so if we don't annex, what would happen? I mean, that's another way to look at it. And I'll just be blunt because I'm just blunt. So right now you receive a lot of your services under contract with Louisville, police, fire, water, and sewer, and those have end dates. So without annexation, we will not provide service. Why would we, right? So the long-range plan has been that you would be annexed by Louisville. That's why we've provided these services. Without annexation and their desire to form your own city, you would have to provide your own service, and the most difficult would be sewer, as Chris Bright explained to you on the video.
So one of the unique aspects of Castle Hills that a lot of residents probably may not understand is the fact that there are 7 water boards kind of governing this community. And what that has allowed is each water board has sort of a jurisdiction of streets, right? And what that has allowed is there's a very local touch to things that are going on within that water board jurisdiction. That could be, gosh, my sidewalk sucks, can you help me get it fixed? Or, gosh, the street needs to be repaired, or slew of things, right? When that goes away and Louisville annexes Castle Hills, that kind of local touch is kind of going to disperse as well. But I think you guys have some thoughts around how to kind of keep that, so it's not just a single, person, city council that represents all of Castle Hills. I know we've talked about that before, or at least looked at different things that we might be able to help with, or put in community watch programs. You've got some different things that might be able to help with that.
Certainly, absolutely. So Chief Deaver, I did ask him to talk about some of the special police programs that we would bring to the community, and he'll do that here in just a few minutes. We have different neighborhood programs, our rec programs, our library programs. All those things are going to come to the community. But in Louisville proper, so there are neighborhoods that have different personalities. It's the same as here. And so I don't think that's going to change, and that can be continued. We actually have a trailer that we roll out when people have block parties, and it's got chairs in it and tables in it and, ice chests and all kinds of stuff. So you can have block parties. That's how you keep that feel for the community, right? But for Louisville, I mean, the most important thing, what we know and what we recognize is that we have to keep your infrastructure at top levels. I mean, this is my budget manager director right here, and she's going to tell you that we invest heavily in our infrastructure, in our neighborhoods, our streets, and our sidewalks, water lines, sewer lines, and we're going to do that here too. That's how you maintain the quality of your neighborhoods, and that's not going to change. In fact, you really, as water districts, you don't have a long-range capital plan for investment. You don't have it. We do. Right now, we have a capital plan to the tune of about $190 million that we're working on right now in the city of Louisville, and that's going in and replacing streets, that's going in and looking at water lines, the whole thing. And so that type of investment is going to continue, and that's really how you maintain the quality of your neighborhood. Now, that neighborhood identity, with programming, we encourage our neighborhoods if they want, special entrance signs with certain things. I mean, we have a program that we even help pay for that. So we encourage neighborhood identity. We know that's some of the best ways to communicate. In today's world, it's so hard to communicate and get the word out. So if we can have organized neighborhood groups that we can communicate with, that's even better. We love that. We'll do everything we can to continue to encourage that. Did I answer your question? Okay. But we'll talk more about the programs with the police department. The chief's going to do that. He's better at that than I am. Anything else? Okay. I think Kronda's up next, and we've received a lot of questions about LISD, and we don't run the school district, but she does, so I'm going to hand that over.
Well, thank you. Again, my name is Kronda Timish, and my husband and I moved into Castle Hills in 1999, and so we have grown our family up here in Castle Hills, and we've gotten to see the community grow up around us, and we absolutely love living here. My kids were able to open Castle Hills Elementary when the first year that it opened. They were excited to be there. They've also been a part of Killian Middle School when it opened and Hebron 9th. I wanted to also let you know that I'm serving my second term as a school board trustee here. So I've been involved in the community from the PTA standpoint and booster clubs, as well as from the school board standpoint. I also, again, want to recognize Louisville ISD School Board President, Ms. Catherine Sells. She's in the back, so she can also answer questions as well. And so there was a lot of questions that were asked last time, and we kind of want to address those. And I think the first question is, will there be any changes to where my student goes, or what happens when we get annexed into Louisville? And the answer is no. Services will not change. If you currently have a student or a grandchild that's attending one of our schools, it will be a seamless transition for you, because all of Castle Hills is within Louisville ISD. You may or may not know that we incorporate 13 different cities and communities in LISD. We're 127 square miles, and we're one of the largest employers in Denton County. So we really know how to do things. We do a great job of being involved in the community. So I want you to know, if you have any questions, please reach out to us. But that one's been addressed. There's also been some questions about the new elementary school that we know that we're going to be opening in August of 2021. It takes us about 18 months to build an elementary school. If you have students in some of our schools at Independence, you know that we are maxing out with availability for students there. And we know with the growth, the continued growth here in our area, that we need to build a new school. The second part of that has been zoned, that's been zoned. Is it complete, and when will it be complete? We don't have everything complete yet with the zoning. We're still working on that. We plan to have the zoning for that area complete by the fall of 2020. Another question is, where I live now, and my child goes to Hebron High School, will they be rezoned to the Colony? And the answer is no. If you have a home here in Castle Hills and your child is going to Hebron High School, they will continue to stay at Hebron High School. We're not rezoning the high school. The land, about 6 or 7 years ago, before I was on the board, before Catherine was on the board, there was empty land, and that undeveloped land that we knew would have an elementary school for, which is now, which is Josie Elementary. That area, that was zoned to the Colony. So that was a decision made before either one of us were on the board. And so that school will go to the Colony High School. I have the links if you want to come up afterwards where you can look at what sections of Castle Hills go to Hebron. If you have younger kids and you're wanting to know, well, I don't know where mine falls in. We do have maps that we can show you of where, if you're looking at or looking to buy a house, which high school is it going to be zoned to? Besides Josie Elementary, is there another school that Louisville ISD is considering building? The answer is no. We're not looking at building any other elementary schools in this area. We feel like that with Josie, that will meet the needs that we have coming in. Another great question that we had from the audience was what do we get from LISD's $1.3375 tax rate? Or what happens to our tax dollars that go to LISD? Because we all know that we pay that tax. And so one of the things is that I want you to know, if you'll go to our LISD website, our checkbook is on the home page. We want to be as transparent as possible. So if you ever have questions, please go to our website. But all of that pays for our academics. It pays for our transportation. 80% of our budget is for teachers. It is for people. It is for nurses. In LISD, we've always had nurses. So if you have a child that needs medical care, they're going to be able to see a nurse when they go at school. And so another great resource is Best Schools in Texas. That's a great way to look up what's going on in each one of our elementary, middle, and high schools here in LISD. It's called Best Schools in Texas. And so one of the other questions we get, because we know when you look at your tax bill between your cities and counties and school districts, the largest rate is going to be the rate that you pay to the school district. What we want to share with you is comparing apples to apples, not how do we compare to the city or to the county, but how do we compare to other districts surrounding us. And I just want to let you know that compared to Frisco and Plano, ours is a 1.3375 per $100 valuation. Frisco is 1.3383 per $1 valuation, and Plano is 1.33735 per $1 valuation. And so that kind of just gives you a perspective that we're right in line with the surrounding districts that are about our size with the number of schools. We are sitting at the 19th largest school district in the state of Texas with almost 52,000 students. And so with that, and we have one of the lowest tax rates in the surrounding area. Currently, after HB3 last legislative session, we dropped from $1.04 to $1.07 for our, which would be, your home budget. You think about for us, we call it M&O, but just what your budget is, your general budget. Ours got dropped to $1.97, which is one of the lowest in the area, and we're really proud of that. With our bond package that we passed in 2017, our tax rate is still 0.3675, and all of that again goes to maintaining the infrastructure. For those of you that have lived in this area, you know that Hebron is 20 years old, and we are begun. If you have students, you know the construction is going on, the refresh, because we have to maintain our buildings. You know what? You have a choice at home. If your air conditioning goes out, you don't have to turn it on. You can wait till you can afford to buy a new one. But in schools, when our air conditioning goes out, kids can't be in the building. So we always have to make sure that we're refreshing and keeping things current. And then the last question that we had was, what property tax exemptions does LISD offer? And then per state law, LISD offers homestead and senior citizen exemptions. So these were the questions last time. Hopefully that answers questions you might have had this time, but I'm happy to answer any other questions that somebody might have.
Hebron High School, how many kids go there now, and how many kids do you guys anticipate over the next 5, 10 years with all that housing being built around it?
So currently we have about 3,600, 3,800 students, and that's including Hebron Ninth. You know, because we actually, Hebron Ninth is one campus, but, you know, my daughter's a senior there now. With the zoning that we have, we have plenty of room to maintain, even if we go up, because it's not, Hebron High School is not at capacity. And so we will have room to absolutely, we've always modeled that. When we're working with our demographers, they're very accurate with what the numbers that they give us. And we're getting updates quarterly as a district with what the numbers that are coming in and the students we have. And we're very confident that we'll be able to meet those needs.
For how long? So there's no new high school?
Huh? There's no need for a new high school because we have capacity at Hebron and we have plenty of capacity at the Colony. And then, of course, if you want to transfer, if there's open enrollment, you know, you can, within LISD, you have school choice, you can go to any campus if there's room.
I have just a couple of, if you look at schools like in LISD and you compare those to like what's being built in Frisco, for example, what's being built, let's just use Frisco as an example. You cited that I think our tax rate's a little bit lower, but it's comparable. You look at those schools and they're incredibly beautiful. And then you look at our schools and, I mean, they get the job done, of course, but they're not, to me, they're not at the same kind of level. So I'm just curious, how are the decisions made to, you know, either update those schools or you know, bring them up? You know, you mentioned that there's some development going on and, you know, our kids know each other, by the way. But, you know, one of the things my kids always laugh at is they're building this beautiful new thing, but they still have carpet in the school.
Right, those are great questions. One of the things that was important to me when I came on the school board was we really didn't have an effective facilities plan. We now have a facilities plan, and we have a building. We have building standards for everything because we are a very large district, and we have to, you know, what we want is to have, if you go from one campus to the other, not only is the educational experience the same, but the buildings are the same. We're also taking in consideration how much it costs, you know, to build it and how much it costs to maintain that. And so, but at Hebron, you're right, it's going to get a significant refresh.
And I think one of those things, especially for Frisco is on a small schools plan. So they are building new schools every year or every 2 years. And so when you have a group of architects that are working with you, you're always going to get the newest, biggest, and best thing. We are financially good stewards of what we have, and so we have not built schools when we haven't felt like they've been needed. And so what you'll see is the arena look a little bit different, but the aesthetics have to still blend into what is existing. Also, if you'll go, we have built some new schools. You'll see Josie Elementary will look different. If you looked at Mill Street Elementary, that was our latest endeavor in elementary schools, and it looks different. But if you think, there really wasn't an elementary school built since Castle Hills from the ground up. And so when you look at that versus every 2 to 3 years building a new campus because you want to keep your campus at 400 or 500 students versus our 700 or 800 students, then you get a different look across the district. I think our new Tech West, where all of our kids will be able to go to if they choose to, will look more like what you're seeing in a different, in a newer, fast growth district. And so that would be my answer.
And that's good. I mean, it's such a perception thing. It's always perception. But, you know, when I go over to Hebron High School, it looks really long too. When you go into that school and it's wall-to-wall carpet, you go, why is there carpet?
Well, I'm not sure which room you're referring to with the carpet. The entranceway's tiled.
Well, there's just some areas of that
But
school.
we're removing that. But that's what the 20-year refresh will completely get rid of that. But you're right, it does look long in the tooth, and that's part of why we have that facilities plan.
20-year refresh?
20-year refresh. So for every campus with our facilities plan, in 20 years, elementaries, middle schools, wherever you're at, in 20 years, we're completely going in, you know, and their bathrooms are getting new tiles, new stall doors, new toilets, everything.
Do you know what the max capacity is of Hebron? I mean, you say that it's planned perfectly and demographics and all of that. I mean, what's the max?
I can,
Closer to 4, I know that.
4,000?
But that's, remember, that's not including Hebron Ninth. That's
Right.
just Hebron
And
High School.
Your maximum is not really where we as trustees set the standard for our students. There is a point where you get to where you're not quite at max, but the level of the feel of the campus changes. And so we try to keep that, and we call that our optimum capacity. So that's not your maximum capacity.
Yeah, that's fine. Totally get that. And I trust you guys are doing the right thing. It's just that, it's an interesting thing when you look at the high school and you see all that building going on around the high school, all those new homes, and you're going, gosh. And then you realize that there really isn't any parking there, at times, and it's.
Well, and you have to remember, a lot of those homes, even though they might look like starters to us, they're normally not. And so our yield, and we can get you that information, our yield in different areas for our demographers, really a home in our area, and I'm thinking, if I think right, and I may be wrong, so do not quote me on this, but we will get you to quote the direct. I think a home may only yield as few as like 0.3 students. I mean, it's not like.
That's not a whole student. Yeah, so it takes several houses to.
Because a lot of these are second and third time homes in our area, yeah.
What is the optimum capacity?
I have it at home, but I'm thinking it's closer to 4.
You're right around 38. Well, that's.
We're like at 36, 37.
But you've got to realize we're including Hebron Ninth because because when when you're talking about Hebron High School, but for those of us, and most of us in that area, when we talk about Hebron, you're talking about Hebron Ninth and Hebron High School, which are two separate campuses with two separate principals, but as a community member, they're all really one. And so we just have to make sure as we're talking about this, we're breaking out the numbers.
So was the optimum only for 10 up, you're saying?
Yes, when we're talking about 4,000, that's it.
It's at each campus. So Hebron 9 would have an optimum, and the main campus would have an optimum, and that's where I'm not sure. I know the exact numbers.
But bottom line right now, you guys are like, oh, we got it.
We feel very confident with the numbers that we have.
And that's one of the reasons, and if you're aware that we have the Collegiate Academy, but we placed that at the Colony High School because we had capacity there. It would have been really just a ridiculous and unwise decision for us to put it at Hebron or one of our other campuses because that draws students, and it only draws 130-ish students a year, but over the years we'll end up with close to 600 students in that Collegiate Academy, and so that's one of the reasons why we elected to put that at the Colony High School.
Thank you for that
Yes, sir.
information.
But your students could go to that if they want to. It's a great deal.
Oh, just moving your arms. Well, again, see us afterwards. We'd love to talk about it. As you can tell, Catherine and I both have raised our families through Louisville ISD, and we've had a great experience. And so we definitely want to hear from you. And again, best schools in Texas if you want to look at some of the great things going on.
All right, thank you very much to our guest and our special guest that we didn't know about, and we do now. If you'll bear with me, I'm going to make one quick adjustment to the agenda. Kevin Deaver, Police Chief, is about to be up next, but I want to bring up Councilman Neil Ferguson real quick since we've got kind of some momentum going, and give him a chance to just welcome you on behalf of the council and maybe share a couple of thoughts, and then we'll move into the police report.
Thank you, James. I am Deputy Mayor Pro Tem of the city, Neil Ferguson, and I've been on the council, I'm not sure now, like 9 years or something. And I think in my first, where'd Donna go? She's over there. I think my first, towards the end of my first year, I started asking questions about Castle Hills. So it's not like, in the last year we went, oh, Castle Hills, what's going on there? It's been on our radar for a long time. A couple of things I wanted to add to some questions that were raised, so I had to make notes. We do have so you were talking about streets and street repair. We do have a app that you can load onto your smartphone. Don't do it yet because you're not in the city of Louisville, you're not annexed yet, but once you're annexed in, we do have an app, and so if you got a street light out, you got a damaged curb, sidewalk, street, whatever it is, dog running around, you can report that, and so, and that gets very quick attention. You will get a response back. And so that's one mechanism. Talking about streets too, we scan streets with equipment on a routine basis, and the equipment actually scores the condition of the streets, so we keep a database of all of the streets and their need for repair, level of need for repair. That lets us schedule both the maintenance and do the budgeting for that need. So it's kind of for us, it's, it's just a mechanism that we constantly keep track of streets. Not that you can't report a problem through the app, but on top of that, but we're, pretty much aware at all times what the condition is of every street in the city. And annexed in, same thing for you. There was kind of a comment, so I want to add to it about representing Castle Hills, having a council person that represents Castle Hills. Currently, we're all at large, and after annexation, we'll still be at large. So every council person represents you. That's been a workable arrangement in the city of Louisville. We like it. The voting process will change at annexation. You will have a person from Castle Hills that you get to vote on, but so does every other citizen in Louisville. But their focus will be on you, but all council members are at large, so they're all responsible for you. So it's not like it's not like a Dallas where everybody's fighting with each other going, I want this for my district, and everybody else is going, I don't care. So with that, a couple other things I want to tell you. By the way, I'm also on the Chamber of Commerce. I'm with my dear friend Christy on the Greater Louisville Arts Alliance. How many people know that we have a professional symphony in Louisville? We do. Professional symphony. This is not a community symphony. These are musicians that routinely play with the Dallas, the Fort Worth Symphony, the ballet, the opera. They're paid union scale for their performances. We have a ballet group. We have a community theater that's been recognized by the Dallas Morning News and I think the state of Texas both. We have a children's theater that will make sure every child who comes and wants to be in a performance will have a role. We have our Visual Arts League that's quite extensive that Christy can tell you a whole lot about. There's a lot of things going. We have an art center. How many know we have a performing arts center? Need to come see it. It's beautiful and incredibly well engineered for sound. There's a lot of things that I think once you start to delve into Louisville, you're going to find out there are pieces that you never knew were there and never probably even guessed would be there that come as, I'd call it, added benefits. So with that, I'll take questions if you have any questions. Did I cover everything that well? Okay, I think James is maybe, I'm not sure if he's going to be back up for 2025, but I'm not going to get into that right now. So.
All right, thank you, Councilman. Now we're going to move straight into the police report. So this is Police Chief Kevin Deaver.
All right, so I'll run. So y'all are all out of questions. That's a good thing. All right, so I wanted to give you all an update. If you all remember, it was February last year whenever we started providing the Castle Hills Patrol to this area. And what that is was 16 hours a day, 7 days a week throughout the year. So I've got some stats up here that I wanted to go through with you. This is 2017, 18, and 19. And what you will see is the calls for service went up this last year. The reason those numbers went up is because of the self-generated activity. Our officers are out doing close patrols, traffic violators, anything that they get out of the vehicle for is a call for service. So that's why you see elevated numbers there. Before that, it was pretty steady, as you can see. The most common calls for service in this area are burglary alarms. That didn't shock anyone, did it? Other than that, minor crashes, suspicious circumstances, everything else is pretty flat. Now, what we did do this past year was I changed the way we document our alarms because I wanted to know whether or not it was a residential burglary alarm or a commercial burglary alarm. So they got separated this past year, but the residential burglar alarms was the leading call for service in this area. Next to that is close patrol, parking violations, suspicious circumstances, minor crash, and commercial burglar alarms. Yes?
And I think I know the answer, but about what percentage of those residential burglary alarms are false?
Upper 90s. Yeah, most burglar alarms. Now, when you say false, you mean not a criminal act. Yeah. Same thing. Yeah. We do see the commercial burglar alarms are more likely to be legitimate than residential, because if they occur at night, it could be a burglar going in. So there's a lot of resources going to things that aren't. And not only in Castle Hills, but throughout the city of Louisville.
I know that's pretty common, but.
Yes, sir.
What's a parking violation?
That's where a vehicle's parked the wrong way, where it's facing traffic, or parked next to a fire hydrant and all that.
It's a whole neighborhood.
So if you'll notice, the 6 highest calls here, not a single one of those is a criminal act. So that's a good thing for Castle Hills. Y'all have relatively no crime in this area. All of these, other than residential burglary alarm, are self-initiated activity by our officers. If they see a parking violation, some of those are called in, but most of the time it's because the officer drives up and sees, and they're looking for something to do while they're out here for 4 to 8 hours. The thing's hiding the top part's hiding my response times. So the first column is 2017, the middle column is 2018, and then the last column is 2019. So you can see we've got roughly a 5-minute drop in our response time to Castle Hills, and that is largely due to the Castle Hills Patrol, and that's what we wanted. You guys are paying for a service. We wanted to deliver that service and show a reduction in that response time for you all. Next question, golf carts. Big topic out here. So everyone was concerned whenever we had our meetings last time, what would happen with the new law? With us enforcing the state law, what would happen? So this is what's happened since October. We've made 7 golf cart stops. 5 of those involve juveniles, either driving recklessly or driving the golf cart, and we hadn't written any citations. Now, that's not to tell you we're not going to write citations. Thus far, we haven't written any. What we're trying to do is gain compliance. And for the most part, we've gotten that. There's not been very many serious instances involving golf carts. We had one wreck that occurred, I believe it was last month, where some kids hit a parked vehicle, did some substantial damage to a parked vehicle. But other than that, nothing major. But that's the biggest issue that we hear about is juveniles driving recklessly on golf carts. So I wanted to give you all an update also. So when we talked before, we talked about the golf carts license plates being required on them. So I reached out to Denton County DMV this past week, and this is what they're telling me. They're still unable to issue license plates. The Texas Department of Motor Vehicles must first adapt the rules, and the Governor's Office of Regulatory Compliance Division must review and accept public comments on the rule. None of that has happened yet. They think possibly by the end of the first quarter that will be done, and then they will have the rules and regulations that they need to issue the license plates. And from the parking lot last time, someone had mentioned that another city was not enforcing state law in their community, and that was the city of Azle. And Ms. Martin checked into that after that meeting, and they in fact told us they are enforcing state law. So in the research I've done, everyone that I have talked to, they enforce the state law as it pertains to golf carts.
Chief, can you talk a little bit about at annexation, how your response will change based on beat structure?
Absolutely. So we did a staffing study. We had some professional consultants come in, and one of the things that I wanted them to do was look at our patrol areas. We call them beats, and they did that citywide, but what I wanted to do was make sure that we could deploy our resources where they needed to be. So once Castle Hills is annexed, then you will have a dedicated, at least one patrol officer for this area, and more than likely you'll have 2 that are out here full-time because it will be a staff beat. And that's something that we haven't had thus far. So I'll take questions here in just a second, but I want to talk about some notes that I made during the discussion earlier. So Chris talked about the greatest asset out here in Castle Hill is the residents. but that's only if you're involved. And someone asked, well, who's going to represent us now? So we've got some resources to do that. Once you're annexed, you will have a neighborhood resource officer that is assigned to Castle Hills. Castle Hills alone, he will be your go-to person for all things city, really. He works very well with code enforcement. If you have issues, he can address sidewalks. He knows who to talk to in the city to get you all connected to the right person. So with that dedicated position, that will help immensely. Other than that, Donna kind of mentioned the programs that we have. So we got a Citizen Police Academy that will be opened up to you. And I'm going to go ahead and open it up this year. It generally starts in August. So if you would like to be a part of that, there's an application process. You'll submit your application, and if you get into CPA, then you get to go to the police department every Thursday night for about 4 hours and learn what the police department does in your community. Once you go to the CPA, then you can join the LCP. I'm throwing a lot of initials at you. That's what cops do, right? They always have to remind me of that. Then you can join the LCP AAA, which is our volunteer group. So they do a lot of things for us. That's people that man the front desk for us. They go out in a marked vehicle and do citizens on patrol. So that's something that you all can do, and you can do it out here in your own community and be a part of getting out and building those relationships that we talked about as well. Another thing is crime watch groups. You know, most of y'all are probably in a HOA. So one thing you can do is kind of evolve that HOA into a crime watch group to some extent. And that gets everyone stays connected, but that builds that relationship with the neighborhood resource officer to help address issues as they come up. And that's really all I've got. Do you all have any questions for me?
I have a question.
Yes.
And I don't know, do you handle any, or have any others had with it when we call 911? Because I had an incident where thankfully it turned out fine, but I had to call 911. And do they know, I know the names of our streets are really hard to pronounce. I probably mentioned it, spelled it 4 or 5 or 6 times, and still, I don't think she ever understood where I was trying to talk about because it was an intersection of 2 really hard names. And so I'm glad that what services weren't needed, but it was just a concern thinking, wow, I wonder if that's something that they understand, that some of our streets are hard to pronounce or hard to understand.
Yeah, and that's a case throughout every city. You know, there are those streets that are hard to pronounce or hard to recognize. You know, it's one they probably hadn't heard before. But once they get a few of the letters into the address, then it will self-populate and they can kind of figure out what it is.
Okay, I think it was just because it was a sir and then a hard name, so.
Gotcha. Someone else had a
Yeah,
question.
I had a similar question. I came to a meeting about a year ago, and someone had a question. If they're calling 911 from a cell phone, will it go to the correct dispatch?
Yeah, and the answer to that is it will go to the closest tower. And I know a lot of times it does go to Carrollton or the Colony, and what they do is redirect it to us. It does shave, or it does add some precious seconds to the call. I don't know how we fix that though, because cell phones will go to the closest tower no matter what, and from there it gets routed where it needs to be.
Landlines for everyone, right?
I don't even have a landline anymore, so. Any other questions?
Do we currently have the same officers on our beat?
Do you?
Do we still have the same officers that are kind of doing our own beat right now, or are you shifting people into this area?
No, the way we do that, it's on an overtime basis. So we have a sign-up board. Now, what you will see, we've got some of the same officers that constantly sign up for it. So that's why you're starting to see the familiar faces. But once you are annexed, the way we do our patrol areas, patrol beats, usually officers ask for certain beats. So it's very likely that there will be one officer that works your area every day that he works or she works.
I noticed when we originally signed the contract, you know, you said 18 hours was your service fee. We did publish on the hours that you would be working. Is there a way to remove that off the website?
Is it published on the city website?
I don't know. It was just something that was published.
So when we first started talking about it, remember, we were going to do 8 hours.
Correct.
And I think where that got published was when we took the plan
to the city council. It was on the backup for the council to get their permission because currently the way the contract is structured, it says that we only come do expanded services at the request of the executive or field, whatever, general manager. And so that document became public somewhere, somebody put it out. But at the time, it was only going to be 8 hours. And so I think we had 2 blocks that were determined by the crimes, the most calls for service. There was a big concern to that. Immediately after that meeting, we decided to expand that from 8 hours to 16 hours. And we never published what those 16 hours were. And for those of you that come to the public safety meetings, I see a couple of you that I've seen before, what we've always said is that we can adjust that if we see that the crime is changing. And so that's kind of what has been put out to the public, that it's always up to Chief Deaver. And we look at those reports all the time. And so we don't really tell you necessarily what those hours are. We try to correlate.
Well, that's fine. I don't want, I just don't want both, you know.
Yeah.
Right.
And so that really never was a concern because it went from 8 hours to 16 hours immediately. But that came from the backup memo that I prepared for the city council to get their approval of us being able to kind of work outside of that existing contract to offer some of our other services and to be able to provide that constant control.
And what we will do is check our website. If it's something that is on there that we can take down, we will. If it's part of a record from a council meeting, we may not be able to.
And Chief, after annexation, you go from 16 hours to 24/7.
Correct.
Your beats.
Yeah.
Does the speed limit change to 30 after?
That I do not know.
Seriously, I thought there was some kind of city code where nobody can go below 30 or something like that. City limit.
You know, the city ordinance does set a residential speed limit. I'll have to do some research into that. We'll put that in the parking lot.
We would annex and they would come under the same that we have for our neighborhoods, the ordinance would.
Right.
Ours is 25 in residential unless otherwise posted.
So possibly.
Although your next Castle Hills Horizon, we'll talk about the speed limit being set on 544 officially. So watch out. It's official now with the state.
James, say that again.
On 544?
Your next Castle Hills Horizon, the insert that goes with the water bills, will have a note in there that the state officially adopted speed limits for 544, 2 different zones. We've adopted them now. It'll be in there.
What is it?
I shouldn't have said that because I don't know. There is one, it's just not, until the state adopts it, it's hard for us to enforce it.
It's not published, there's no sign up there, so it just goes fast.
It's a secret speed limit. If you guess wrong, we'll let you know.
And I will tell y'all one last thing. So the officers that do work out here, they're very appreciative of you all. They really enjoy the relationships that they are building out here with you. And, you know, they talk, every time I see one of them, they talk about that and who they know in Castle Hills and things like that. So really appreciate that. And thank you for your continued support. We appreciate it.
Whose jurisdiction is it from 544 along Josie up to 121? Who's that?
I would have to look at our map.
Okay.
Should be Louisville.
Was the county at
All
one
up to
point?
121, yeah. Should be Louisville.
We'll verify that. I believe they're right, it is Louisville, we'll verify it for you. And we might be able to find that 544 speed limit while we're doing this next thing, so.
Oh, I'm supposed to be talking into this. I forgot. I told everybody else, and then I didn't do it. So we have one last item on the agenda. This is where we need help from you. This is part of our Louisville 2025 Touchpoint process. Councilman Ferguson, would you like to say anything before we proceed, or shall we just jump into it? Okay.
So, first of all, I have to brag, the 2025 concept came completely from citizens. We had about 40 some odd people involved in pitching ideas and trying to organize, you know, what do we need to do over the next 10 years. And when the council adopted that plan, not long after we got an award from the Texas chapter of American Planning Association. I should get Richard up here, he can tell us better than I can. For the design of the plan, and then last, just what, 2-3 months ago, received the first ever gold award in the state of Texas for implementation of a plan, of a long-range plan. And now we're up potentially for a national gold award for best long-range plan in the entire United States. So here we are, we're getting closer and closer to 2025, and now starting to look at, what's the next long-range plan? 2035, obviously. But we also still have bits and pieces of 2025 that we're not done with, we're not there yet, and also time changes, technology changes, ideas change, people change, and so we want to kind of re-examine 2025 and see, where are we? Have we got all the right parts? Are they going the right direction? Did we miss anything? Is there something that is now a great idea that we somehow didn't have before? And then start to again put that process together for 2035. And it will, once again, be citizen-driven. And so I'm going to let James go into a little more detail about that process and how it will involve Castle Hills. But I will tell you this. I want to sidetrack for a second. One element, you talked about neighborhoods and keeping neighborhood identity. If you look at the current 2025 plan in the Thriving Neighborhoods section, you'll see that there's several elements in there that specifically talk about preserving neighborhood identities. I happen to live in a neighborhood, one street in the entire neighborhood, 6 houses, and it has a unique identity. And I very much want to preserve the identity of my street. We don't have sidewalks. We're different. We're just different. But every neighborhood has its own character and identity and people and community and sense of place and pride of place. And so 2025 talks to that, and we'll continue to talk about that. And so, that concern about are we addressing preserving that identity that different neighborhoods had? Yes, that we started thinking about that several years ago, and so that's literally in the action plans. But I'm going to let James take it from here, other than to say the best plan is going to be the one that citizens put together, period. It's not the council. In fact, I went to the first 2025 meeting and never went to another one for this reason. I don't want to design my own plan. I want somebody else to tell me this is what we need, and I want somebody else to be the citizens. And so I stayed out of it until they were done with their work, because I didn't want it to be my plan. I wanted it to be their plan. So with that, I'll turn it over to James.
Thank you, Councilman. I'm going to ask Karen to come forward for us, please. And as she's coming forward, I'll point around the room. The people in the blue shirts and one guy in the jacket that didn't wear his blue shirt, and the ones in uniform that can wear whatever they want, as long as it's a uniform. These are some senior city staff, and we're here to interact with you during this next part, to answer your questions, to jot down questions if we can't answer them right away, to kind of help with this process. We have parks, public services, finance, fire, city management, economic development, community engagement, planning, libraries over here, police, you recognize him probably. So we are here to communicate with you. Whatever questions you have, we want to build relationships, and that's part of this. And now Karen's going to take us through this last little bit.
Okay, thank you, James. As the councilman described to you, the plans in Louisville are very much driven by what the citizens want, what the citizens imagine for the future of the community. And so as we're doing this update now and looking ahead to 2035, as he told you, we're really interested to hear what people think throughout all of Louisville and in Castle Hills. Over the last couple of months, we've been trying to reach out to people by meeting with groups, meeting with organizations, going to the schools, going to the Chamber of Commerce and so forth to get ideas from folks. And now we're trying to take the ideas we've heard so far and get more feedback on them. And so we've designed a number of ways to do that. We try to make this process be very flexible so everybody can be involved in the way that they want to, so that you can contribute how you want in whatever way is going to work the best for you. And so tonight's meeting is one of those ways that we hope you will be able to contribute and share your ideas of what you'd like to see for the future. And so as you came in, I think you probably noticed all these boards around the room. We had an event in downtown, in Old Town last night, where we used these same kind of boards, and we're asking people kind of big questions, in a way, the blue sky questions about think ahead, think big about what you'd like for Castle Hills and Louisville for the future. What do you imagine that's the best thing that you'd like to see happening here? And that's what we're asking you to share with us, because right now we're looking at that. What are the trends? What could we do to make things even better? What could make this just even a better place to live or a better place to have your business? And so the questions that we have around the rooms, if you look like, for instance, over here on this side, it says Louisville Public Library. Each of these, there's two boards together on each one, and the first board with the pictures and the information talks about some of the things that have happened, that have been accomplished in the pretty short time since Louisville adopted that 2025 plan. And so it should get you thinking about, here's what's been going on. And then on the other board, there's a question. It says, like in this case, how might library and information services evolve in response to emerging technology and change public perception? I mean, we know that's all changing. What would you like to get out of that library? So that's one of the questions we'd like you to ask, to answer, or share your ideas. I think that they've just been passing around some Post-it notes and pens if you need the pens. What we'd like for you to do over the next little bit of our meeting is walk around the room, take a look at each one of the boards that are here, and if you have some ideas, some thoughts, something that you'd like to see happening, write it on a Post-it note and stick it on that board with the question. So what we're doing is we're collecting all of those. We have a huge bunch already from the people who participated last night, but we want to get your ideas tonight. We're going to put all of those together, take them back to the City Council, and that's what's going to shape this next plan update. So we really want you to help us with that this evening. There are other ways you can be involved after tonight too, but we want to really get your ideas going tonight. So let me see if I can read the signs just to give you a sense. There's no particular order you have to go in, but we hope you'll think about each one of them. So I read the library one already. In the back corner over there, we're asking, how can Louisville develop more informed and involved residents? So the questions you've been talking about tonight might fit in there, of things that you think we ought to be doing. And in all of these, it's Louisville, that includes Castle Hills. So what could be done to have more informed and involved citizens? Right in the back, in the very far back here, it asks, how can Louisville be a city that continues to value and protect the natural world? So maybe you've been over to Leela. Maybe there's some things that you think about here within Castle Hills. What would you like to see in that regard? Then the sign that's also by the window, how can Louisville be a city that helps businesses prosper? And the last one over here, how can Louisville be a city that helps neighborhoods thrive? So take a few minutes, walk around, look at the information, talk to anybody that you'd like of the staff members who are here, but share your ideas on those Post-its, because we want to know what you'd like to see as we look ahead over the next 10, 15, 20 years. Okay, does that make sense to everybody? Okay, so take a look and tell us what you think and what you'd like to see. Thanks.